Okay, real talk for a second. Transformers is kind of in shambles at the moment. All the eggs that Hasbro has put into its aligned continuity basket have exploded, leaving behind a mess that only Rescue Bots seems to have survived. IDW is wrapping up and moving into its own reboot, leaving the fate of many beloved characters up in the air, in terms of crossing over into other continuities at least. Yes, I know deep down that's not wrong, but a man can dream, damn it! Hasbro seem to have gotten confused as to what constitutes an actual series and hired the worst gaming company on YouTube to make an adult-oriented show. By now we all know how that steaming pile turned out. The Siege toy line is shaping up pretty nicely, but the fallout of the gimmick-heavy Prime Wars has caused many fans to feel fatigued on the series, and some have either jumped to Masterpiece, third party, or quit altogether. And finally, the Bumblebee movie is showing a lot of promise in both its film and toy line. However, at this point it may be too little too late, and at present we still have no idea if Transformers 7 will even happen. To be honest, I'm totally cool with that, as long as they continue the Studio Series line enough to give us a first movie Megatron, and an Onslaught, and a Triple Changing Drift. And DevCon! The world needs this mighty hero! Amidst all of this, fresh off the tails of the relatively successful RID, Hasbro has called upon bolder media for aid in this dire time. Responsible for the likes of The Amazing World of Social Commentary and Foster's Home for Hallucinating Meth Heads, this was pitched to the community as a reboot of G1. Not to nitpick or anything, even if that is the point of this whole video, but isn't every continuity technically a reboot of G1? Regardless, the first 3 episodes are up already, and after watching the double episode feature known as Fractured Memory, although that's at least what the fandom calls it because it's actually split into Fractured and Memory, I thought it would be fun to share my thoughts. Well, fun for me anyway. For you, sitting there with your hands tied behind your back and your eyes forced open in front of the screen, I hope it's not too painful. Sorry to start off with something so negative, but one of the problems this show presents is a lack of identity in its current state, and a clear indication of how this is how boring the theme song turned out. If someone were to rank the theme songs from best to worst, this would likely be somewhere in the bottom half. Definitely above RID and Energon, but possibly below G2.
Heroic Autobots versus evil Decepticons with the fate of planet Earth hanging in the balance.
No, definitely above G2. A good theme song outlines the tone of the show, giving the audience a hint as to which take on the franchise the showrunners will give us. G1's second season hints at a greater universe beyond. The movie theme proclaims that this will be an hour and a half of pure metal 80s science fiction action. Beast Wars weaves the primal rage of combat. Beast Machine's electronic beat mimics Megatron's cold mechanical dystopian grip on the world. Although Cybertron doesn't really do much, it's a bit of a meme at the moment, so I think I need to mention it.
Our worlds are in danger.
And this isn't even scratching the surface. Don't forget Headmasters, Victory, Animated, Prime Beast Hunters, Car Robots. Hell, even the Movieverse theme is iconic in its own way. Sure, this isn't the most important aspect of a show, but think about how many iconic TV show openings stick in your head long after seeing them. Maybe I've been spoiled for choice given my degenerate weeaboo tendencies, but I expected a little bit more from this. When I mistakenly tried to defend the steaming pile of garbage that was Machinima's Combiner Wars, I mentioned that the lower frame rate was purely a stylistic choice, and that it didn't really affect the production values at all. Same applies to RID, and although that show had rather pleasant animation, it wasn't really anything to gush about. Now Cyberverse, on the other hand, looks fucking gorgeous. As someone who's seen many forms of animation, one thing I absolutely love is when a show uses an art style that can't be mistaken for another one. We haven't really gotten much in the way of truly unique art styles in the franchise, as aside from Beast Wars Animated and Prime, several shows blend into other cartoons at the time, and some even with other Transformers shows. I mean, the character designs in this one already looks bloody amazing, combining the best elements of characters across several continuities, but to see them in such fluid motion is a joy. If anything, it makes me frustrated that we'll probably never see good toys of these designs unless third party takes up the challenge, because right now the entire Cyberverse toy line, save for 1 or 2 figures, is complete garbage.
Get more woe.
One thing I was concerned about when I first saw the clips was the somewhat barren terrain. It seems like they were just standing around in an open field with a skybox around them. Now that I've seen more of the animation, I'm happy to report that this isn't the case, although it does still happen from time to time. I know it's an odd thing to be worried about, but it was genuinely concerning from the preview footage. In fact, in the end, I only really have 2 nitpicks with it overall. First off, stock transformation. Get them out of here. They only exist to pad an episode, and when it's only 10 minutes an episode, you don't need to pad anything to begin with. Especially when the stock footage is only 5 seconds long. Why? The only time in recent memory that I've seen it actually work well is Voltron, and this show definitely ain't Voltron, so f*** off. Secondly, the show unfortunately seems to be a little sparse on the character models. Windblade's exposition dump in the first episode is fine on its own, but it would have been far better to see Cybertron fully populated. Now I get that 3D animation is expensive, but Prime found a way around this by implementing Veercons and showing all the flashbacks as hand-painted backdrops. Given the show's limited budget, it would make more sense for them to do something along those lines, and to some extent the Seekers act as that. Whilst on Earth it's fine, they're in the middle of the desert, there aren't any humans around, and bots and cons are likely all in stasis somewhere, so they can keep the character count to a minimum as they focus on Bee and Windblade's relationship. But eventually they should bring in more— wait a second, hang on, that reminds me of something. Not Bumblebee and Windblade, and not the character count, no, I'm referring to— Honestly, it's hard to believe no one's talking about this at the moment, but this is the first time in a good while that a show has opened without the human element. In fact, the synopses for the next few episodes don't seem to mention humans either. Hell, plot twist, they could pull a reverse Beast Wars and you could find out they're not on Earth at all. I'm not against them adding puny flesh bags down the line, but this opening episode is a nice change of pace. Just, if they do add some, don't make them as annoying as— Dear God, I hope one of two things happens to this show. Either Bumblebee's voice box gets repaired, or he starts to get mature, because after 2 episodes of listening to his annoying radio voice, sticking my hand in a fire ant's nest is starting to sound a lot less painful. The sad thing is, we've done this idea better, twice. In Prime, having beeps and squawks is far less degrading, and in the movieverse it even wasn't this bloody terrible. Plus, already showed us that a mature Bumblebee that actually had a voice and could communicate properly is still popular to the kids. Just by virtue of being Bumblebee, he'll form a connection and toys will fly off the shelves.
Whoa!
He's Bumblebee for Christ's sake. Hell, even the show itself proves that he doesn't have to sound this annoying. He uses beeps to talk on Cybertron and it sounds fine, and when he speaks in his memory banks, he's also perfectly fine. After getting used to a more mature Bee in RID, I really hope I'm not forced to sit through these kid antics for too long. On the side note though, while we're talking about Bumblebee, I think the reason for his memory loss is PTSD. I mean, eternally expanding Megatron head is some pretty hefty foreshadowing, and this is a studio known for weaving darker themes into their narratives. I'm pretty sure kids can handle it. I know I'm about to destroy my credibility, for the umpteenth time, but I actually like Windblade, or at least how she was envisioned in IDW. The arc of constantly having to break her morals in order to uphold the Cybertronian status quo was fairly intriguing, and her flaw of gullibility and overbearing empathy worked in that universe. Unfortunately, neither RID or Piss Wars got the memo though, because they were both garbage in terms of Windblade. In terms of character, on one side we've got a pointless Sailor Moon Mary Sue, and on the other side we've got Combiner murdering Edgelord. Whilst I don't really have a problem with her at a base level, because she has a lot of potential, 2 representations against 1 competent one does not count as good odds. In Cyberverse, she mostly acts as the straight woman to Bumblebee's comedic antics.
Jesus Christ, that came out wrong.
There's hints of a more layered character under the no-nonsense exterior, but I doubt we'll see much of it until episode 5. Speaking of— Again, I don't really have a problem with this. I understand many people's frustration with the Machinima disaster, however you cannot blame the episode length on this. If anything, it was a blessing in disguise. Can you imagine how frustrating it would have been if they dragged everything out for a full half hour? I doubt anyone would have been able to survive a full marathon. Now, fans have taken to grouping the first 2 episodes together, as I've said before, putting the 2 titles together to form the term fractured memory. Some have theorized this will be the norm, and that every 2 episodes will line up and progress the story at regular intervals. I don't really think this will be the case though, because the synopses don't line up at the moment, and they've announced 5 episodes so far as opposed to 4 or 6. I could be wrong, and I have been wrong about far worse. So, in all honesty, for what this series is trying to do, it's decent. This isn't a war of good and evil anymore. We're dealing with something far more realistic. Not the battle of the biggest, but, you know, something actually grounded. So take what I say with a grain of salt, or a spatula. That said, I consider this an educated guess, and although I'd absolutely love this format to take over, there's no signs of it at present. Before the show aired, we got a ton of reveals for characters appearing in the show. In terms of the Decepticon cast, it's pretty stellar. Of course, you've got the old favourites and the recent re-additions to the cast, and then you've also got some obscure backbenchers, and they've added my favourite Seeker of all time to the roster. This is fantastic. I've got to run out and buy the toy right now. Oh, right. Well, this is certainly frustrating. Hasbro, right? So, with all these Decepticons present, where are they? I understand that they don't want to dump all the villains at once, but the pilot episode needs to establish the threat that the series is going to tackle. Pretty much every story needs conflict, and a Transformers show typically uses a Megatron, or a Steeljaw, or a Megatron, or a Megatron, or a Galvatron, or a Megatron to that end. This show, in spite of explaining its world well enough, hasn't given any indication as to where it's going. Sure, there's the importance of unlocking the rest of Bumblebee's memories and finding where the Allspark is, but what lies at the end of that journey? What lies at the end doesn't necessarily have to line up with what actually happens, but there should be more of an indication as to where the endgame is. Most Transformers series have delivered in this category, but Cyberverse is missing this key piece of the puzzle. Yes, withholding this information can make for intrigue, but when all you have in the meantime is Thundercracker and a gender-swapped Hotlink, there's not much to keep you coming back outside of the fact that I'm a Transformers fan who will eat up any shit that Hasbro throws at me. Well, almost all of it. That brings me to my final tangent. I'm not sure if people are actually complaining about this, but if you are, stop complaining about Hotlink being gender swapped. Transformers is quite the sausage fest as is, and currently more fembots isn't a bad thing. Besides, did anyone who wasn't a Seeker completionist actually care about Hotlink before Cyberverse? Didn't think so. I wouldn't mind if they continued to do this with more pre-established obscure G1 characters. Hell, Acid Storm would be a nice change of oh right, he's just the same as normal. In the end, it's not really a problem. It's perfectly okay, which leads into the conclusion. Linking back to my original statement, the Transformers franchise is in a bit of a mess right now. What it needs is a push to bring it back into public consciousness, just like Animated and the Movieverse did before that, and Cybertron did before that, if memory serves me well, and Beast Wars before that, and then the granddaddy himself, Generation 1. Transformers needs a heavy hitter to bring in new fans, rather than satisfy existing ones. This fandom simply isn't sustainable in its current form, and I don't think Cyberverse is the show we need right now. Don't get me wrong, Cyberverse on its own is fine. It's decent and it still has a lot of potential to be good. It doesn't tarnish the legacy of those that came before it, it's not getting away with any stupid narrative blemishes that the fanbase glosses over, and it's certainly not traumatizing anyone for its use of the cortical psychic patch. I mean, I've got things I fear about. I fear things going into my eyes, to the point where I went into shock last time I got medical eye drops, but you don't see me claiming that Infinity War traumatized me! Wait, what was I talking about? Wow, that was an odd tangent. The point is, the show's fine, but I can't help but wish it was more. Even with a complete garbage toy line and an average show commencement, we're likely in for an inoffensive 3 years, but it would be preferable if the show could gain some momentum. Until that day, though, I'll be crying in a corner about how these designs aren't ever going to get decent figures.
Our worlds are in... Whoa.